What the wind does after death, for we who are humans, we possess wind. We make clouds when we die. The wind makes dust because it intends to blow, taking away our footprints, and our footprints, which the wind intends to blow away, would otherwise still lie plainly visible, for the thing would seem as if we still lived. Therefore, the winds intend to blow, taking away our footprints. The Karoo, South Africa, a hard and arid region where only the fittest can survive. Long, long, long ago, the Karoo was a sea. This region is in all aspects one of the most important areas in South Africa. What we know about the ancient inhabitants of this trying environment, we have learned from memories that they have created on natural canvases in more than 30,000 sites in southern Africa. These nomadic artists were hunter-gatherers we call the San, the first people who settled many millennia ago in southern Africa. Other artists were pastoralists and herders. They were the Khoi. The Khoi and the San, or Khoisan, had no alphabet, not the type we know. To record and communicate their beliefs, struggles, joys, fears and needs, they created images on rocks. What did they really want to tell us? Is it possible to decipher their creations? Can we crack their code?
Driekopseiland is a very interesting and special rock art site.
Quite often when one's on the site, it's a very special experience being there.
Driekopseiland, they call it an island. It's an amazing place to visit.
Driekopseiland is a glaciated riverbed in the Riet River not far from Kimberley in the Northern Cape. The almost 4,000 engravings can be grouped into an eastern and a western section. The engravings on the eastern side of the riverbed are mostly geometric designs. One will find more realistic images on the western section of Driekopseiland.
Both sections of the site have a lot of geometric engravings, but that lower section, the portion that's further downstream, has more animal images. Very, very abraded, but certainly more animal images.
The engravings at Driekopseiland form part of a larger and systematic distribution of rock art in southern Africa. The style of rock art depends on the environment and the nature of the geological canvases.
I think there is more to it than simply the availability. We've often been amazed at seeing from a distance a place that looks absolutely ideal in terms of rock surfaces and even in terms of aura, and one gets there and there's nothing. Quite often one sees a spot in the landscape and you think, there one's likely to find it, and indeed you do.
Rock paintings using pigments are more common in the mountain ranges, where the artists lived in caves or rock shelters. Engravings are predominant in open areas where dolerite boulders offer canvases of a more durable and permanent nature. Engravings, also called petroglyphs, are mostly incised, pecked, or scraped. Petroglyphs on dolerite boulders are made by removing the crust of the surface. The rock varnish covering the crust is called patina. By removing the darker patina, a lighter shade of rock is revealed. Patination reoccurs over time, and this indicates age.
Well, one of the big difficulties with rock art generally is dating. That's really one of the biggest problems that we have, because it is important to relate it historically to whatever else is happening in the landscape, the social landscape, and the coming and going of people. So that is a big problem. But we do have a sense in certain instances, and there are improvements all the time in dating of rock art, which are enabling us to link it into the history of the later Stone Age and people who came into southern Africa, or ways of life that evolved in this context at a later stage.
Theme variations of engravings at Driekopseiland are also typical of rock art elsewhere in southern Africa. Rock art that realistically depicts humans, animals or objects is called representational.
We have, the very well understood, what you might call classic Bushman rock art that, when you think about South African rock art, it's probably what springs to mind, the sort of very finely shaded and very detailed, naturalistic, representational sort of imagery that is very well known worldwide, really. Sort of lots of humans, lots of animals, lots of things that are reasonably easy to recognize as a thing.
The eland is a common theme in representational rock art all over southern Africa. Besides being an important source of fat, this magnificent antelope had a very special place in the San people's culture.
The eland filters into so many dimensions of sort of socio-cultural life. It's such a recurrent feature, both in the north and in the south. And also in the rock art, that it's sort of like these things all sort of feed into the eland as a very rich source of symbolism. But certainly amongst the Kalahari clan, it's considered to have a lot of what's called this is the potency, power. The shamans who go into trance, for example, are called Kausi, which means the owners of power. So then by sort of killing that animal, you sort of gain access to its which you can then use to sort of boost you on your way as you activate your own potency, and then do all the things that you are supposed to do as a ritual specialist.
Non-representational or schematic images are basically geometric designs.
There's a lot of engravings that are called somewhat problematically non-representational, maybe, or geometric, schematic. These things that are sort of crosses, circles, sort of little grids, dots, rows of dots. And again, that's also very poorly understood compared to the very detailed representational imagery of the sun tradition. And so the predominance of these kind of forms in certain engraving sites does make those engravings much more enigmatic.
Most rock art productions in southern Africa are centuries, if not millennia old. In the absence of written and oral history, is it possible to make sense and meaning out of these images?
There are a variety of ways that people tried to make meaning out of the rock art in the absence of anyone still producing it, anyone to talk to about what was going on. Nowadays, we often refer to those processes as a sort of gaze and guess approach.
The first and most important breakthrough in decoding southern African rock art came in the 1870s, when a German linguist and his sister-in-law studied a group of Sun convicts in Cape Town. They were Wilhelm Blick and Lucy Lloyd, who published their extensive research into Kham and Kun culture.
And this was information taken from a group of Bushmen from the Karoo called the Kham. There were 6 main informants, and they sort of spent varying lengths of time living in the Blake and Lloyd household in Mowbray.
In the same time frame, a surveyor and self-taught anthropologist employed a Sun guide for his work in the Maluti Mountains. The guide supplied Joseph Orpen with first-hand information about the meaning of rock art in the Lesotho Mountains.
So Orpen and King, the Bushman guide, visited together a number of large shelters in the sandstone belts in the Maluti. Some of those shelters had images in them, and Orpen, while he was in the shelters, asked King what the images meant. And he then, on his return to his farm, he sort of wrote them up, and then he sent them a manuscript off to Cape Town to be published.
Sun cultures in the Kalahari received special attention in the second half of the 20th century from a group of scientists who called themselves the Harvard Kalahari Research Group. Cracking the rock art code came a step closer with the work of 2 South African researchers. They were Patricia Vinicombe, author of People of the Eland, and David Lewis Williams, an archaeologist from Wits University.
We really do have probably one of the best understood forms of rock art in the world here in South Africa, because of the very sort of detailed and specific correspondences that we can pull out between what's going on in the paintings and what's going on in our ethnographic information.
The decoding of enigmatic images at Driekopseiland remains a challenge to this day. The engravings mark a social landscape that seems to be dramatically different from other rock art sites in the Northern Cape.
A place like Driekopseiland, there's a sense of place there that is a factor of the particular geological setting, which is the glacial pavement there in the bed of the river. And I think that combination of different environmental features were read by people, the makers of the art, in terms of some kind of special locality, special place, even, if you like, some kind of sacredness.
Driekopseiland falls within the boundaries of the Northern Cape region known as Griqualand West. The early settlers were a mixture of San, Khoi, Kuranas and Swanas. Scientific estimates of the age of the images at Driekopseiland are between 2,000 and 2,500 years old. Archaeologists agree that some of the engravings are younger than 1,200 years. But who were the artists?
The issue at Driekopseiland is that it's again this issue of projecting back historically known ethnicities. And when one actually looks at the evidence on the ground at Driekopseiland, it's very difficult to say exactly this was X group or Y group. There is a very strong argument that suggests it's a kind of type locality for Khoi rock art. But I've personally found it difficult substantiating that archaeologically.
The engravings at Driekops are mostly pecked into the bed of the Riet River, a subsidiary of the Modder River. Known as Gumap by earlier European explorers, the river covers most of the engravings during the rainy season.
I think that in itself is evidence that the place was regarded as special at the time that the rock art was being made. And I think it relates to the glacial pavement that's exposed there in relation to the river which flows over it at certain seasons. I think those seasonal rhythms could be part of what makes it a special place.
The repetitive nature of a narrow range of geometric or schematic motifs over a considerable period of time amazes and puzzles scientists and artists who try to decode Driekopseiland. Even Raymond Dart, who introduced the skull of the Taung child to the world in the 1920s, linked the pecked engravings of Driekops to some distant civilizations. This theory has lately been discredited.
I think Raymond Dart was very brave in putting forward those ideas in that 1925 paper. He wasn't a rock art specialist, but in fact those ideas were fairly current at that time. What was more remarkable was that he repeated them all in a little paper in 1952 when ideas had begun to move on quite a bit. The dynamism of what was happening in the Stone Age in Southern Africa was very much a Southern African thing.
These more outlandish claims, these sort of tend to focus on the idea again that these things are not indigenous to South Africa, that these were produced by people who have come from elsewhere, and that we can sort of read a secret history based on these people who come here, and then they like essentially just these circles and these lines are like their signatures of what they did.
Walter Battus is a world-famous South African artist who made several visits to Driekopseiland. He attributed the earlier designs to the sun and the later ones to the Kurana people. Rock art had a lasting influence on this painter's work.
I think the mere fact that Battus, as a renowned artist, but then at that stage as a young man, used the rock art to make an initial breakthrough into the world of rock art, and especially when we consider his connections with Abbe Breuer, we find that in a certain way it not only led to his own international importance, but it opened up Driekopseiland as a site that was then visited by other people, many more people than what would have been the case had Battus not been in contact with that world. So to my mind, I really do believe that Battus contributed greatly, not only to our understanding of Driekopseiland, but especially of rock art in general.
Battus compared the place to great whales lying in the mud that exposed skins decorated with geometric designs. It is images like these that shaped his distinctive artistic style.
I was very struck personally by his description of Driekopseiland as resembling, there are these big glacial pavements lying lengthwise in the bed of the river. And he remarked that they resembled a pair of whales wallowing in the mud, which I thought was a marvelous description. I've been very struck with the possibility that that people making the art, people living in that area in Stone Age times, were probably animists and conceived of the landscape as being infused with spiritual beings and so on.
The artist Karel Fourie from Parys in the Free State province is known as Lady of the Rocks among the groups she frequently visits. Fourie's paintings reflect her spiritual bond with these groups. She admits that Driekopseiland has had a profound effect on her paintings and her interpretations of San rock art.
When I visited Driekopseiland, I felt, when I looked at all these beautiful engravings, to me it was like maps. Maps of places that I don't know. These people told me, I communicated in a different manner with them, that they told me there are places that you don't know of. Maybe those places are inside my head or inside your head, but you don't know of these places. That's why I call this painting Maps of the Unknown.
Water is life, and for hunter-gatherers from our very distant past, this saying had a special meaning. Perhaps the water at Driekopseiland never dried up, and this may be the reason for the vast numbers of engravings at the site.
You know, it seems very obvious that water is the sort of key determining factor in the Driekopseiland rock art. In the past, obviously, the water wouldn't have been regulated in that way. So, you know, it would be a very dynamic site. There would be, changes all the time, pretty much in terms of, what images you could see, what images you couldn't see.
David Morris, from the McGregor Museum in Kimberley and a leading expert on Driekopseiland, believes that ritual specialists called shamans were central in the San's beliefs about water and rain.
I think the shaman could be your rainmaker, your medicine man, your ritual specialist. In contexts such as rainmaking, which we think might be the predominant context for instance, a site like Vaskans in the Karoo, many of those Karoo sites, there are suggestions that indicate the context relating to the rain. So those could have been ritual specialists concerned with matters such as rainmaking.
According to Mark McGranahan from Wits University, living in the arid Karoo meant forming a very tightly knit web around water. In these circumstances, the shamans were thought of being able to manipulate and control water. In the San's belief system about water and rain, animals played an important role.
There were male rains that were the sort of sudden violent thunderstorms that you get in the interior, and there were female rain cows who were this much more gentle, nourishing, misty kind of rain, and shamans were considered to go into trance and sort of capture these animals.
An important medium of the shaman is the trance dance. A typical setting is a central fire, women who sing and clap, and men who dance around them. As the intensity increases, the shaman enters a supernatural realm where he calls for rain and draws out sickness, wickedness, and harmful things. The visions experienced during this altered state of consciousness are the images and themes of rock art that were made at special places at the landscape.
Based on the fact that the art probably derives from altered states of consciousness, we can then sort of turn to the neurology, the neuropsychology. And so altered states of consciousness happen in very particular ways. They go through certain stages. So the entoptic stage is the first stage, and that's experienced by everyone. It involves geometric patterns, broadly speaking, but only very certain kinds of geometric patterns. So, you're not talking about the broad sweep of all geometric imagery. It cannot be accounted for by entoptic means. But certain forms are characteristic of it. Things like nested curves, or zigzags, or grids, these kinds of things, very characteristic of entoptic stage phenomenon. We find that the kinds of geometric images that are present are the ones that we would associate with that first stage of altered states of consciousness, the entoptic stage of altered states of consciousness. So, we find zigzags We find nested curves. We find grids sort of superimposed. And we also find them being incorporated into the representational imagery. So, you might see a man with sort of zigzag legs, or you might see sort of curves being incorporated into the body of an animal, or this kind of thing. And you also see perhaps what are graphical representations of other forms of hallucination. So you see sometimes people with sort of stretched out heads, for example, or very elongated, stretched bodies. These kinds of things.
Another water-related mythical animal that occupied a central role at Driekopseiland was the water snake. While the artist Walter Battis saw the humps of whales sticking out at the site, David Morris had his own visions of a serpent.
One day at the site, I was glancing across these glacial pavements, and suddenly to me it looked like a giant snake, which was an idea put out of my mind. But when I went to the ethnography, I thought one of the ways into understanding that site was in relation to the placement of the engravings on rocks that get submerged by water seasonally. And so going to the ethnography concerning water, up came all these ideas about the water snake.
The link between Driekopseiland and rain animals, according to Mark McGranahan, has already been established. These animals include the water snake.
You've got this glaciated pavement, which really does look serpentine. It's kind of coming out of the water and going into the water. These glaciated pavements are in these sort of gentle curving snake-like forms. And then with geometric patterning sort of all over this snake as it emerges from the water.
To a large extent, the concept of the magical water snake transcends cultural borders.
These beliefs in water snakes are very, very widespread in South Africa. They're certainly not restricted to hunter-gatherer bushman communities. They're very common. They're common even today amongst Bantu-speaking communities.
For the rock artists at Driekopseiland, the water snake could have represented the angry male rain and a mythical power that has to be soothed and pleased.
The king talks about the snake. The snake is amongst the waters things in the Blake and Lloyd records. But in this area, these ideas have been recorded up through the 20th century. There was a chap called Barend van Vreden who wrote and recorded Griqua stories about the water snake. And they would tell of how this giant water snake could swell up and block a river if it was displeased with humanity. And likewise it could sink and allow the river to flow.
The layout of rock engravings at Driekopseiland may also have some embedded meaning. The omnipresence of water and the clustering nature of geometrical engravings have led to newer interpretations of the site.
Concerning Driekopseiland, everyone was concentrating on identity issues. But I began to wonder whether there was some kind of metaphoric ritual context we were not picking up on. If I'm correct that Driekopseiland relates somehow to female puberty rites, that could be a very different ritual context, which wouldn't involve the shaman so much as perhaps the initiates themselves. It's possible that those images were made as part of the ritual that young girls go through in their rite of passage into adulthood.
The coming of age of young maidens and the capture of puberty rites with rock engravings could therefore have been the inspiration for the artists at Driekopseiland.
There's a further dimension to Driekopseiland that can only really be fully developed in the context of other similar sort of geometric engraved sites in the Northern Cape and beyond. And that is the connection between the sort of snake and with femininity, with female identities. When a girl first menstruates in Khoisan generally, so both Khoi and San communities, she becomes a very dangerous person. And one of the reasons that she's dangerous is that she becomes very attractive to the rain animal, particularly the male form of the rain animal. This animal is highly governed by smell, and it sort of smells the blood of the first menstruation, and then it sort of, that kind of attracts it. So the Kham, the bushman of the Northern Cape, interviewed by Blake and Lloyd, spoke about the new maiden, the maiden who's in first menstruation, gaining the rain's magical power.
Maybe some of the engravings at Driekopseiland represent female clothing, such as aprons, or the markings young maidens had on their bodies, or their behavior to please the rain animal.
They had to behave in very kind of controlled ways. They had to look down. They had to drink out of ostrich eggshells with very small holes, so they didn't drink too much water in one go. They had to eat very small portions of food. They had to live in a small hut, not move around very much. They had to paint their relatives, their male relatives particularly, with certain geometric designs of red ochre in order to sort of stop the male snake becoming jealous of those people. And so this kind of thing is what is considered to feed into places like Driekopseiland.
I've seen reenactments of a Hokmesi ritual in the Richtersveld, where one of the women who had gone through the ritual in her youth had geometric designs on her face, which are absolutely like what you see at Driekopseiland.
Making meaning of Driekopseiland is like finding one's way in the dark. But we have come a long way since the times when intellectuals thought that the designs were too complex to be South African-ish.
One of the things that one learns through ethnography is that practices change. We can't always project back from known practices to past practices. What we don't have is the specific link between those images and what's on the rock. But that could simply be a product of changing practices through time.
No visitor to Driekopseiland is left untouched. The first rays of the sun reveal the true magnificence and three-dimensional features of the art. On a night with a full moon at low angle, the reversal of figure and ground takes place, leaving a negative image of mythical proportions. It is then when one realizes that Driekopseiland is indeed a very, very special place. The wind makes dust because it intends to blow, taking away our footprints, and our footprints, which the wind intends to blow away, would otherwise still lie plainly visible, for the thing would seem as if we still lived. Therefore, the winds intend to blow, taking away our